Welcome to Sharp Football Analysis. I'm Warren Sharp, and the college football season gets started this weekend. So we're super excited for that. But first, you know what we got to do. We got to get you some futures to get you set before week 0 of the college football season gets started. Let's get into it. All right, we're going to be diving into 6 of our college football betting expert Ryan McCrystal's favorite futures for the 2026 college football season. But before we get into that, a quick ask for you. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. That really helps the channel a lot, and you will not miss any of our content when you're doing that. We're going to be coming with a lot of shows this season. We've ramped up our content schedule. We had a great show yesterday, got another great show today in this episode. We've got more to come this week and then the weeks to come before the season gets here. So we're going to be giving out tons of free bets, free information, free analysis that is going to help you build your bankroll, increase your portfolio, make you smarter about the game. So you're not going to want to miss this. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. With that being said, let's dive into today's show with our college football betting expert, Ryan McCrystal. We'll welcome him on here. Ryan joined us last during the college football season. He was our draft expert as we walked through a lot of his mock drafts. He had another successful mock draft season. And so if you're new to the channel, stay tuned when it comes time, February, March, when the NFL season ends. Ryan McCrystal gets really started in the mock draft streets. And then he was with us throughout the mock draft process. We also had him rank his favorite draft classes. So you get to see a little bit of Ryan McCrystal after the NFL draft as well on this channel. He's just full of information and analysis. Is really going to help you get smarter and hopefully today make some money here on some of his favorite bets. So Ryan, welcome on board. I'm sure you're excited for the college football season.
Absolutely. Can't wait for it to get started with week 0.
Yeah, so here we go. It starts this weekend. Let's get some futures first. Your first one up, you're going to go to your best bet from the Big 12, and that's going to be on the Cincinnati Bearcats. You're not viewing this season as one that's going to be particularly successful for them with their new quarterback from Georgia Southern. Talk to us a little bit about why you are fading the Cincinnati Bearcats and going under 5.5 on their win total.
Yeah, this one pretty much comes down to quarterback play. Obviously, they lost Brendan Sorsby. He transferred to Texas Tech before that blew up in Texas Tech's face for a variety of reasons, obviously, and all the drama that transpired there. But losing Sorsby is a big deal to this offense because not only is he a big play threat, he had an arm to throw downfield. He could scramble around a little bit, but he also protected the football. He didn't make a lot of turnovers. He didn't take a lot of sacks. And in college football, when there's mistakes made all over the place, having a quarterback who can both give you big plays and protect the ball is pretty rare and can drastically change the trajectory of an offense. And that's what Cincinnati had last year, and is why they exceeded expectations during Brendan Sorsby's tenure there. You remove him from that equation, and almost anybody that you bring in is not going to live up to that. You're not going to find somebody else who can both play smart and produce big plays. But not only are they not replacing Sorsby adequately, they might go in the opposite direction with J.C. French, the guy they brought in from Georgia Southern. I was kind of surprised that they couldn't do better than this in the portal. Obviously, Cincinnati doesn't have a ton of money to throw around, but they are a Big 12 program with a little bit of money to go out there and get somebody. They kind of settled for a mediocre Sun Belt quarterback. I think it's going to be a massive downgrade, and I just want to share one stat to kind of drive home this point. Looking at sack rate versus pressure, Sorsby ranked second out of 155 qualified quarterbacks last year. Only 6% of the time he was pressured did he take a sack. J.C. French, again, playing in the Sun Belt, so not exactly the toughest defenses, 24% of the time he was pressured, he took a sack. They ranked 139th. So you're going from a high-level quarterback, an NFL prospect who could make big plays and keep the game on schedule, and you're handing it off to a Sun Belt quarterback who couldn't handle Sun Belt defenses. I think it has the potential to be a train wreck for the Cincinnati offense. I don't think they're going to be terrible, like a 2-win team or anything like that, but I do think getting to bowl eligibility is really going to be a tough ask for them. I see them as 4-8, 5-7 type of team, and hitting the under on this prop.
Now, there is two notes on that. First of all, that sack rate is really mind-boggling. That is a terrible transition from number 2 best to, what was it, 139th. That is massive in the NFL as well. A lot of people know, following our analysis here, we take that into consideration in the NFL a ton. Sacks are drive killers. Turnovers are game killers. And you can't have a quarterback taking a lot of sacks. The other thing to be aware of, though, if you are betting this under, you put it in the write-up for this one, that the Bearcats might have a chance to jump out to like as good of a 3-0 start potentially, but people shouldn't get too scared about that because of the schedule coming after that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're going to pick up some non-conference wins. They're going to look okay out of the gate, I think, but the Big 12 schedule is rough. I think going winless in the Big 12 is certainly on the table.
Okay. Let's pivot over to the Atlantic Coast Conference, the ACC, a team near your backyard, in fact, the Virginia Cavaliers. You are a little bit bullish on the Cavaliers this upcoming season. Talk to us a little bit about why you like their over 7.5 wins in 2026.
Yeah, I'm going back to this one 2 years in a row, and obviously last year it was an easy winner for us. I think we hit the over by Halloween, and hoping for the same luck again.
The best kind.
This last year, I think a lot of people dismissed their success because the schedule was so easy. They had an easy non-conference schedule. They avoided the best teams in the ACC for the most part. So finishing with 11 wins after picking up a bowl win, people kind of put an asterisk on it. And I think that's a big reason why this number is only at 7.5. And it was fair. They did have a ridiculously easy schedule. It inflated their win total. All of that is true. But the only reason you should expect a downgrade this year is if the schedule gets harder, which it doesn't. They've got another easy schedule, a bunch of winnable non-conference games. They don't get Notre Dame on the schedule, which obviously a bunch of the ACC teams do. They're not in that rotation yet. And if you looked at their ACC schedule, what they do is they swap out Stanford and Louisville, one terrible team, one good team in Stanford and Louisville, and they add in Syracuse and SMU, which is kind of maybe a slight step up. Syracuse is a little better than Stanford, but both of those teams are games UVA should certainly win. SMU and Louisville, very comparable teams that they swapped there. It's basically the same schedule. They don't play the toughest teams in the conference. They don't have to face Miami. They don't have to face Clemson. If you think Clemson is going to be near the top, that's debatable, but they don't have to face those teams that traditionally have more talent than them. So I don't see any reason why we should expect, even if you view them as being sort of like that 11 win was just like a scheduled 11 wins. I don't see why you should expect a significant drop back because it's the same schedule. Now, the other piece to this puzzle here is I think the degree to which the schedule allowed them to get 11 wins last year is maybe a little bit overstated, because it looked like if you didn't pay too close attention to the program overall, which most people don't because they haven't been relevant to that level in a very long time, it sort of looked like they got this easy schedule and they just sort of rolled to 11 wins and you would expect them to fall back. But what also happened behind the scenes was the athletic department decided to actually spend money and invest in NIL. And I think it sort of ties into, if you follow college basketball at all, Tony Bennett, their basketball coach, great coach for a long time, won a national championship there. He stepped down. He was anti-NIL, like very hard, to a Dabo Swinney level, maybe even a stronger anti-NIL stance than Dabo Swinney has in college football. He did not want to get involved. Whether he stepped down because the athletic department said they were going to get involved, or whether him stepping down allowed them to get involved, I don't know exactly the order of that. But he stepped down, and suddenly they started spending money. And this is a school with a large alumni base, a lot of rich alumni who are willing to spend money, and they have started spending money. So they're not spending money at the highest levels, but they are trying to win and paying to get good players into the program. And so that happened, that coincided with the easy schedule. So the schedule is part of it, but this is a legitimate good Power 4 program now because they're actually paying good Power 4 players. They lost a bunch of guys. Chandler Morris, their quarterback from last year, is gone. So they went out and they took Missouri's quarterback and paid to go spend him. They signed a running back, Peyton Lewis, who was a big-time recruit out of Tennessee. Like, they added a bunch of guys to step in, and I think that because they're spending at an appropriate level now, they're not going to go away. Now, winning 11 games again, that's going to be tough for a program like UVA to do year in and year out. but they're going to consistently be an 8-win, 9-win kind of team as long as they keep spending money like this, I think, especially in a year like this where the schedule remains very manageable. So I think this team at worst goes 8-4 and hits the over. And I think 9 or 10 wins is still potentially on the table if some of these transfers come in and produce right away.
So potentially like an alt over situation for UVA, spending money to keep up with James Franklin down at Virginia Tech now as well in their backyard. Those two schools going to be competing for some of those in-state players in the future. All right, now let's go to another team in the ACC, a little bit further south, Georgia Tech. Just lost Haynes King, and Haynes King obviously went to Carolina, looked pretty, surprisingly good in that first Hall of Fame game until he got injured, taking over there, potentially QB of the future emerging if they move on from Bryce Young. We'll see. But he's no longer in Georgia Tech, and they're going to have to replace him. And you think as a result of that and some other factors, Georgia Tech could be in for a tough season. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, I mean, Haynes King was the offense. He carried them to a bunch of wins over the past few seasons. He's legendary. He will be a Georgia Tech legend forever for what he did over the last couple seasons. He's just that type of player that puts you on the back, almost like, like he is to Georgia Tech, kind of like what Tim Tebow was to Florida. He's just that type of player that can just carry you to wins in games where you aren't necessarily even expecting it sometimes. And any credit over the past couple of years that doesn't go to Haynes King probably belongs to their offensive coordinator, Buster Faulkner, who left to take the job at Florida. And with him, he took the heir apparent to Haynes King, Aaron Philo, who's going to be Florida's quarterback this season now. So they really kind of blew up the whole offense this year, and they just don't have the resources to replace those guys right away. Alberto Mendoza takes over at quarterback. That's Fernando Mendoza's brother, who, if you watched Indiana last year, you probably saw him play because for a backup, he got a lot of action last year in those Indiana blowouts. He looked good in mop-up duty last year, but I think the fact that he's no longer at Indiana probably tells us a little something about what our expectations should be. He was at the Indiana program before his brother got there. He was there for 2 full years with Curt Cignetti. He obviously got a decent amount of playing time last year. Cignetti saw him up close and personal for the past 2 years and decided he was going to move on and go get Josh Hoover from TCU, who didn't even have a great season at TCU. So he obviously, Curt Cignetti, who seems to have an incredible eye for talent, especially quarterbacks, was not willing to bet on Alberto Mendoza. So now he goes to a program at Georgia Tech with a new offensive coordinator who doesn't have the same kind of talent around him. I don't think we should have high expectations for him. Now, I mentioned the new offensive coordinator stepping in for Buster Faulkner, and that's another question I have because they hired George Godsey as an offensive coordinator, a name that NFL fans are probably familiar with. He's been in the NFL for a long time, but the last time he called plays was in 2016 with the Texans, and he actually lost play calling duties during that year. Bill O'Brien took the play calling duties back away from him. So it's been a decade since he called plays, and he wasn't even good enough to maintain that job. He also hasn't coached in college since 2010. The last time he coached in college, he was Latavius Murray's running backs coach at UCF. And Murray went on to have a long NFL career and has now been retired for a few seasons. That's how long ago it was. And they're trusting him to step in and run the offense now with a quarterback that they brought in from the transfer portal. It just seems like, there's a lot unknown. Like we don't know a lot about Godsey as a play caller. Maybe it'll work out. Maybe Mendoza will work out. It's a lot unknown. But when you're bringing a lot of those unknowns together for the first time, and they've just had this one off season to get to know each other and try to make it work, it usually doesn't go well. You need a little bit more stability, I think, to make the transfer portal era, to really win at a high level in the transfer portal era. And they just seem to have almost none of that right now. I think Brent Key's a great coach. I think he'll get it back on track. But this feels like probably a rough rebuilding year for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, I know George Godsey. I haven't talked to him in years, met him before. I knew him when he was in Miami a little bit. And then I remember that I think in Houston, he was doing he was calling the run plays and somebody else was calling the pass plays, or he was calling the red zone. I forget exactly what it was. It was a strange setup there, but no doubt difficult situation and questionable, kind of as to what they're going to get from a results perspective. What's not questionable about what you're going to get from a results perspective is, are ability to give you winning information in 2026. And the NFL season is just a couple of weeks away, and we are running a 20% off site-wide sale right now over at sharp.football. That means you can grab our betting package, our fantasy analysis, our draft kit, this 2026 football preview book right here that Ryan contributed a lot to as well. All of it is 20% off using code SHOW20, SHOW20. And as I mentioned, the results, they speak for themselves. Last season, a $100 bettor won $14,154 following our recommendations. The season before that, same $100 bettor won $15,636. That's $29,790 for a $100 bettor over the last 2 years, betting every single one of our recommendations over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. So do not wait. Lock in your edge right now before the season kicks off. Go to sharp.football and use code SHOW20. Okay. Best bet number 3 from the ACC conference, Ryan. You've got an interesting one because some other people that I know are looking at the opposite direction here. I'm interested in your thought process on Cal. You're betting they're over 6.5 wins for the Cal Bears. Talk to us a little bit about why you like this one.
Yeah, the biggest reason is I'm betting on their quarterback, Jaron-Keawe Sagapolutele, JKS, as most people will call him to avoid saying the name.
Yeah, I think he's good. That was pretty good pronunciation.
I think he's the best quarterback in the ACC. I think he's the type of quarterback who wins you a game or two a year that you're not expecting to win. The type of guy that can just pull it out at the end. I think at some point over the next 2 years, if Cal wins enough games, he's going to be in the Heisman conversation and eventually in the conversation for being a very high draft pick in the NFL. I think he is a special talent. When you have that type of quarterback running the show, expectations should be elevated a little bit. Even if the rest of the roster doesn't look great, you're usually going to win more games than people are expecting just because you have that type of guy who just a couple times a year, he's going to have a special performance and pull off an upset. But the other reason why I'm betting on it is the change that they made at head coach, bringing in Tosh Lupoi, former Oregon defensive coordinator, former player at Cal. They brought him in. It's his first time as a head coach. I don't know. He was a good defensive coordinator. It's really hard to predict how guys will do as head coaches. I don't know how he's going to do, but I do know that he invigorated the boosters and they started spending money and they kept a bunch of players. Most importantly, they kept JKS, who was certainly very coveted in the transfer portal market, and they signed a bunch of guys. And if you remember the past couple years, Cal was the minor leagues for the rest of the Power 5 or Power 4 conferences. Basically, they lost Fernando Mendoza, obviously, lost Jade Knott, lost a couple wide receivers, lost multiple running backs off that team a couple years ago. Actually, I mean, they were producing players the same way the good G5 programs were, and just sending their guys off after their freshman and sophomore year. They kept all those guys and added others because they started spending money this offseason. I think most importantly is they added a bunch of legitimate starting talent on offense, guys who have starting experience already to surround JKS with even more talent. They added Ian Strong, a strong wide receiver from Rutgers, Dorian Thomas, who might, I think has a case to maybe emerge as the best tight end in the ACC this year. Added him from New Mexico, got Adam Muhammad from Washington, which is kind of a surprise that he left the program there because he was, a key part of the offense in the backfield at Oregon. I think he's going to have a great season, at Washington. I think he's going to have a great season at Cal this year. Adding that type of talent around JKS, who had a phenomenal freshman season, even without a lot of offensive talent around him last year, I think the floor for this program has really been elevated. And then, like I said, JKS being the type of player that probably pulls off an upset or two throughout the season, I think they're, a safe bet to hit the over. And I think at some point in the next 2 years, JKS is going to have a special season and enter the Heisman candidacy. If they won 8 or 9 games and he was hovering around the Heisman conversation, I would not be surprised if that happens this year.
How is their travel schedule? Obviously a big question anytime team like Cal plays in the ACC, has to come to the East Coast. Has it gotten a little bit better over the past couple of years? Have they worked out any of the kinks since they first started sending them over here in terms of the way that they're performing out on the East Coast?
Well, it's tough, obviously, because you have to make some long road trips. They do have a few back-to-back. I think they have 3 straight East Coast games in late October, early November. I'm curious how they handle that. If maybe they're able to stay over there for one of those weeks, that's interesting. I don't know if they're going to do that, but I don't put too much stock in how that affects the team because it goes both ways. They also get teams coming to them, and we've seen teams go out those late night games at Cal and lay an egg. So
Right.
they get the benefit from it also on the other side. So I think it kind of evens out in the wash eventually. And then who knows? Maybe it does start, especially when you start to have some players who've been through it a few times. Maybe it does start to they learn how to handle the transition to the East Coast, and maybe it does start to become an advantage if you have a more veteran team.
Yeah, or at least not as big of a disadvantage as
Yeah.
it once was when you first started doing it. All right, before we get to Ryan's next best bet, which is in the SEC and his first of two best bets from the SEC, I just want to reset the odds that we were grabbing these best bets at that Ryan has here. So Cincinnati under 5.5, you could get that for -145. Georgia Tech under 6.5, that was -125 at DraftKings. UVA over 7.5, you could get that at -138. It looks like you might be able to get 8.5 at +144. So that's another option. And then we also have Cal, who he just mentioned here, and that is over is +125. You can get that at +125 over at DraftKings right now. So those are the odds there. Now, obviously, not too strong odds. This one is the first one where we're actually laying a bit of juice, Ryan. And this is Ole Miss to miss the playoffs. That is -210. So talk to us a little bit about why you think Ole Miss will struggle to at least make the playoffs. Like, they still might have a fine season, but they're going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah, we're laying a little bit more here, but I think we're still getting good value because of what Ole Miss did in the playoff last year. I think they're getting a little bit too much credit, and I think that the effect of the change in coaching staff is maybe being downplayed a little bit because of what happened in the playoff without Kiffin. Pete Golding, what he deserves a ton of credit for what he did, getting the team refocused after Kiffin stepped away, not getting distracted by that, and winning a couple of playoff games. He deserves a ton of credit for that. But that kind of feels like a different job completely from a head coaching perspective than preparing your team in the offseason, installing new offense and defense, getting guys prepared. That was almost like all of that was already done. Like, the team was there, the guys were together, they knew the offense and the defense. It was just he had to get them focused, and he clearly did a phenomenal job at getting them focused and motivated for those playoff games without Kiffin. But then he really became the head coach after that. And we don't know what that's going to look like. The coaching, Kiffin was a huge part of their success. Just because they were able to refocus, I don't think we should downplay what Kiffin meant to that team, because it was still his offense. They kept things on track because Charlie Weiss had been calling the plays, and he stayed behind to call the plays throughout the playoffs. And so that's why it looked like Kiffin didn't matter that much to the offense, but it was still Lane Kiffin's offense. Now he took that to LSU, and he took Charlie Weiss Jr. with him. And so now they're installing a new system. John David Baker is going to be their new offense coordinator. He did coach under Kiffin for a couple of years at Ole Miss, but he spent the past 2 seasons at East Carolina. So he's still coming in. He hasn't worked with Trinidad Chambliss. He doesn't know the current roster as well. So there's still a significant transition there. And we haven't seen him call plays at this level before. So we don't know. He did a nice job at East Carolina. So I don't think there's going to be a huge drop off, but it's still just completely different dynamics. And Kiffin is certainly one of those coaches who elevates the talent around him with his system. He has always had a knack for designing an offense to fit his players and calling plays. Charlie Weiss Jr. has obviously done a nice job taking on more of those responsibilities in recent years. So that transition, I think, even though we didn't see it hurt them in the playoffs, in the regular season this year, I do think we'll see a little bit of a drop off just because he doesn't have, Kiffin is one of the best. Kiffin and Weiss together the past few years have consistently running one of the best offenses, and they're not going to have that advantage. The other factor here is the schedule is really tough. You have to win at least 9 games to make the playoffs. You probably have to win 10, and they've got a pretty brutal schedule. They face Texas, Georgia, and LSU, probably the 3 best teams in the SEC. You got to win at least one of them to have a chance at the playoffs. And then they also play on the road at Florida and at Oklahoma. Those are not going to be easy games. Those are going to be good teams, and going into those tough road environments, it's not going to be easy. That's at least 5 losable games on the schedule. To guarantee you get into the playoffs, you got to win at least 3 of them. And that's a tough ask against teams like that. I just don't think the schedule shapes up for a first-year head coach with a new offensive coordinator to have that type of success in this situation. I think Ole Miss is still going to be a good team, but 8-4 feels a lot more realistic than 10 wins in the playoffs.
All right, one of those games is against LSU. You just mentioned this game is circled on the calendar, September 19th, 7:30 p.m. It's a home game for Mississippi. Lane Kiffin going back. Right now, Ole Miss is laying 2.5 points at home, short home favorite. Total sits at 57.5, which leads us into your overall best bet. You are taking LSU over 8.5 wins. Lane Kiffin has been bringing NFL players back this week, Ryan. I don't know if this was kind of something you were feeling, but this is what he's doing. Talk to us about what Lane Kiffin is building there at LSU, why you think that they're capable of winning 9 or more games in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing for winning games in college football is having the most talent. And so when a team goes out in the portal and just loads up on all of the big names, pay attention to it and trust that they're going to find a way to bring all of that talent together and it's going to work out. I feel sort of similarly to this bet as I did to Texas Tech last year, who, that was our best bet last year, was picking them to win the Big 12 because they just accumulated so much talent. It was like, just throw out the history. Who cares what they used to be? They've got the most talent. They're going to win a lot of games. And, that paid out for us. I think LSU, just look at the talent that they added. They just overhauled every position on the roster. They went out and signed everybody. I just think Kiffin's going to find a way to make it work. Thinking that this team is going to lose 4 games with the amount of talent that they added, I just don't see how that's going to happen. They just have, Kiffin has been the type of coach over the years who he stubs his toe every so often. He'll lose a game, maybe 2 games that you're not expecting, but not 4 games. He doesn't have bad seasons relative to the talent that he's accumulated. So this type of roster doesn't go 8-4, even in the SEC. Now, on top of that, I think the schedule kind of works in his favor. You mentioned that Ole Miss game. I'm actually kind of assuming that's a loss just because it's at Ole Miss, the emotions of that game. It feels like the kind of game that Ole Miss, even though they're not as talented as LSU, probably steps up and wins. Like, I could certainly see that happening. But after that Ole Miss game, their next 2 toughest opponents are probably Texas and Texas A&M. Those are both home games for LSU. So they're probably going to be favored, and at least against Texas A&M, I would think they would be favored. Texas game is maybe more of a toss-up. And then their toughest road games, other than that Ole Miss game, are at Alabama and at Tennessee, 2 teams that are breaking in new quarterbacks. They've had a lot of turnover on both of those rosters. We kind of don't know what to expect. I think it could be a down year for both of those programs. So that's kind of it as far as the meat of their schedule. So I think that Ole Miss game, we could probably write in a loss there and still think this team is going to win 10 games because their toughest opponents are at home. Their tough road games are against teams that are kind of going through a transition. If this team goes 9-3, LSU fans are going to be mad. Like, they're going to be pretty pissed off at Lane Kiffin if they're 9-3 and maybe just on the outside of a playoff conversation. And yet, if they go 9-3, we win the over on this bet. I think they're going to go 10-2 and make the playoffs. Maybe even better than that. Maybe they even win the SEC. So, when a team accumulates all the talent, the team that wins the offseason, we've seen over the past few years that team usually follows through with a really strong year when you add this much talent. Add in the fact that the schedule looks favorable. I think the over on their win total is probably going to be an easy win for us.
You mentioned a couple of those home games that they've got. I've got some of the early look-ahead odds at a couple of different sports books. Right now, LSU is hosting Texas A&M. That's also a September game, the weekend after they play Ole Miss. That currently right now, LSU is laying 3.5 points in that game at home. So they're the favorite of just over a field goal. And then the first weekend of November 7th, they host Alabama. Right now, I'm seeing LSU is laying 4 points at home as a home favorite of, once again, just over a field goal, laying 4 points there. And you also mentioned that they also play Texas. I don't have a line on that game where I'm looking right now, but they will be hosting Texas at Baton Rouge as well. So Ryan's best bet to round out the show is LSU over 8.5. Now, I will say I heard that there were some guys that were taking the under on 9.5. But there's a big difference between 9.5 needing to win 10 games just to win your bet versus over 8.5. That single game worth a ton, especially in college football, especially for a team like this that's amassing a lot of talent. Much easier to get 9 wins than it is to get 10 wins against this schedule. So the best bet, LSU over 8.5, and that'll do it for us. As you guys know, if you watched our show last year, the Friday betting show that we roll out every single Thursday night, overnight into Friday, we welcomed in Ryan McCrystal. He gave us all of his best bets for the college slate that upcoming weekend, and we're going to be rolling that show back. So while we're adding more shows, and again, we're doing this for you guys, hopefully you think that's a good idea to get more shows throughout the week. And if you do, smash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, let us see that this is what you're looking for. But that show that we're going to be doing on Friday is here to stay. We're just adding more shows earlier on, but we will have Ryan back with us every single Friday morning. As soon as you wake up, you set your clock to it. You wake up, you get organized, you get ready to head out the door, start your workday at home, wherever you work. That show will be in your feed on Friday mornings. Can't wait for it. Ryan, thanks as always. Best of luck. You had a great season last year. You did a great job with the futures as well last season. Let's do it once more here in 2026. And that'll do it for another episode of Sharp Football Analysis. Make sure you guys are subscribed. We'll see you again soon.